Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. I just want to thank our sponsors once again, Building Point Canada and SolidCAD. These are our platinum sponsors. We have a number of other sponsors that help to make this possible, but we really appreciate that. It allows us to continue doing what we're doing and maintain the community during these challenging times. So I have the pleasure of introducing Gregg Schoppman, who is the Principal and Operations Discipline Leader for FMI Corporation. FMI, if you're not familiar, they are a business consultant that works across North America. I believe they have offices in Canada and all over the US. And what they do is they work with businesses to help them with their business strategies, with digital transformation, mergers and acquisitions. And they're a very valuable source of industry data. I subscribe to their feeds and read their economic reports. So it's a really fantastic that they're able to join us and participate in today's event. The subject matter for this session is, let me just double check to make sure I got it correct. Help me out, Gregg. The future of work, designing resiliency and building safety for COVID, and the strategy after storm, leading the post-COVID-19 world. So Gregg's had a very long career in the industry. I think he's been in FMI for about 15 years, working all over the world, helping businesses achieve their goals, helping with overall, I'm sure digital strategy is a big part of that right now. And FMI has a great perspective on what's happening down in the US and Canada related to COVID and getting back to work. So Gregg, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate the time. And you're aware we have your audio solid. I think your camera is already frozen because of your internet connection, but as long as we got your audio, we should be okay. And alternative. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Well, as Tom said, we're going to be talking about this concept of strategy leading your business, especially after this post-COVID-19 world. And it is an interesting time. This was my first day actually traveling after roughly a 3.5 month pause button, for lack of a better word. I'm actually in Charleston, South Carolina. So I wore my official South Carolina shirt, a little bit of palm trees going here. But it was interesting nonetheless to be actually in an airport and see some of the sights. And if nothing else, it was a sobering reminder of some of the challenges that are happening right now. But all that being said, we're going to push through, and there is a tomorrow. And I had one of my colleagues share this, and I thought it was a very interesting perspective. For so many of our clients, we hear about, we want to get back to normal. We want to get back to normal. What does normal look like? And I realize what people are saying. And after sitting for roughly several hours with a mask on a plane, I'm pretty much chapped all the way through from hand sanitizer. I get it. On the other hand, I had another person I was dealing with that said, Gregg, for all this discussion about getting back to normal, what if we find a way to get back to better? And I think that's a very interesting perspective. And hopefully at the conclusion of today's program, through not only my session, but through all of the many great speakers at this particular program, these virtual programs, you'll be thinking about how do we evolve as a business and get back to better. So where we're going today, and by the way, I have, this is one of the many webinars I've done over the last 3 months. I think I was just telling Tom, this is about the 30th. And normally I have I don't have the video capability. If nothing else, I've been told I have a face built for radio. However, you do get to see me live and in living color. But this is a little bit about me. As Tom said, I've been in the industry pretty much my entire career. I worked as a vertical builder and a civil contractor for many years before coming to FMI. And I've been with FMI for 15 years, and I've worked all over the world. We're going to look at this program particularly from several different categories. One, the strategic perspective. Two, the tactical. And Tom also indicated we're talking about when we get back to work. And I realize across not only Canada, but throughout North America, where people hit the restart button at different times. So this concept of refocusing and restart is going to be very different for all of our attendees. And lastly, this concept of the new normal. And, whether or not face masks and social distancing will be here for the long haul or the short term, that's not for me to decide. On the other hand, what do we need to be thinking about relative to getting back to better? So when this whole thing actually started, and we're talking obviously about the beginning of 2020, I know particularly in the United States, it was right around the end of March when really everything took a turn. And interestingly enough, I was actually in Mexico at the time doing work, and I'm probably very lucky to have gotten back to the United States. But all that being said, there was this initial shock of the pandemic. And one of the things I created during this time was this 2x2 matrix. And I realize it's a little bit different to look at this 2x2 matrix in kind of this pizza pie fashion. But if you look at the y-axis where it says internal and external, and the x-axis on the left, which says short-term and long-term, this concept of saying, all right, we have to look at this from not only the short-term perspective, but we're now, especially this current call to action, in this concept of the long view. And these individual pizza slices, if you prefer, when we initially had the pandemic hit, we were talking about our associates. Are they safe? How are they going to work from home? How are we going to manage our business? What about client projects? What does that look like? Now we're to the point in many instances throughout North America, and if not the world, thinking about, okay, we're past that. How do we think about the business concluding in 2020 as well as moving into 2021? And the words around the outside of the circle, and I'm pointing to them as if you can see my finger, or you can, but you don't know where I'm pointing. But those 5 words, the perseverance, people first, proactive communication, decisiveness, positivity. I know it sounds kind of like a Stephen Covey poster, but those 5 tenets are really grounding us to say, when we make these decisions about our strategy and tactics, are we taking into those as kind of our DNA traits, those things to help us get better? So when we think about the strategic orientation or the business orientation, what are those ramifications? And then once again, the other part of this is that tactical or day-to-day planning perspective. So when we start talking about strategic, and it's an interesting program when I actually quote Mike Tyson, but I love this quote, and I will try not to do the awful affect, but everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. For instance, we've all, as businesses, probably started 2020. And even me at FMI, we began the year thinking about a very bright and rosy future for 2020. And as we were now 2.5, 3 months into 2020, we almost wanted to hit the reset button. And in some cases, we probably still do. However, the concept of changing, and it doesn't mean that our plan was flawed. In fact, we did have different scenarios to where when we looked at how this pandemic was shaping out, what are the things that we still need to keep pushing forward as a business? Additionally, we had to definitely hit the pause button on some of the things that were maybe longer reaching, getting back to some of the basics. The point is, the COVID crisis has demanded us to think about a potential range of futures. And we've seen everything from, and we've heard about the professionals talking about the different curves, the V-shaped curve, the U-shaped curve. What is the rebound going to look like? And the simple fact is we don't know. However, as we go forward, we need to be thinking about the range of potential futures, which we're going to talk about in a second. The other part is we're going to make some very good decisions, and we're also going to make some bad decisions, whether that's just in 2021 or our longer range plan. One of the things we cannot do is necessarily get caught in analysis paralysis. Part of our job in weathering this current storm, we have to also think about how do we move forward today, keep things pushing. At the same time, are we playing enough offense? Are we capitalizing on potential opportunities? And you notice I use the term weathering the storm. As a Florida resident, and I'm sure many of our friends maybe weather down in down south during the winter time. That's a season we don't really celebrate in Florida, as you all know. That being said, we all hear about our storms that we have, and I think that the principle, there are going to be many businesses that hunker down and get in this bunker mentality. Well, folks, I get it. It's a natural instinct to hunker down in the face of a storm. However, there is also a call for a time to play offense. And if we're hunkered down and we don't really kind of come up for air, so to speak, are we missing these things? And yes, I understand traditional long-term planning may fall short. For instance, I have many clients go, Gregg, we're just trying to make sure we make payroll right now. But at the same time, how do we make sure that we're still playing enough offense? So when you think about the different scenarios, and we have three different perspectives, and it's obviously based on this range of futures that we talk about. The first one is this concept of rebound. And the point being here is we've seen this V-shaped curve, whether that's 1 to 2 quarters, that negative GDP or economic gain. The point is it rebounds, and that's one potential future. And then there's obviously, when I think of, in the United States, a place like New York City, which has been utterly decimated, well, there's definitely going to be a long-term lingering effect there. But the point is, that's one very, I would say, optimistic perspective for any given market. On the other hand, there's the complete 180 degrees from that, which is this reversion, a very deep and prolonged economic impact. Minimum 6 quarters of negative GDP, whether that's Canadian GDP, American GDP, but the simple fact that we're going to see this kind of play out. As compared to, say, the Great Recession for the United States. And I bring that up because when you look at the Canadian market and the United States market, there were two different perspectives. One had more of a U-shaped curve, which was the United States. Canada had a completely different, they had that V-shaped curve, which kind of took it back. However, this is a global pandemic, and we can't stress that enough. So the point is, these are two perspectives. The one thing that we're looking at FMI is this concept of, is it this time for reinvention? So it takes a little bit of the reversion piece, that there's going to be some level of negative GDP. On the other hand, when we see these major shifts in remote learning, remote work, many of my clients for the longest time didn't think you could work from home and be productive. Well, if nothing else, we've proved it's challenging, especially maybe when you're teaching your kids algebra. So being a daycare, a high school, a middle school, and also doing work. But when you think about this shift, as well as the exponential increase in e-commerce and the impacts to the supply chain, well, the point is there's been this concept of, yes, will we have a negative impact, or has COVID had some very negative ramifications on our markets? Absolutely. On the other hand, has it also caused some shifts? And one of the things that actually comes up as I work with so many of my clients, and one of my colleagues coined this phrase, bears and bulls can exist in multiple markets. Simply put, you can have a very challenging marketplace, but there are going to be winners. So let's not lose sight of those things as we go forward. The point is, there's probably, for many leaders and folks that are in this webinar now, when we think about this decision paralysis, or probably many of you have heard this concept of analysis paralysis. You'll see companies that are very risk averse. They have to get more data. On the other hand, they're almost continually playing defense. Well, let's see where this thing plays out. Folks, that's not going to be successful. And I was joking with Tom at the start of this, as we were in the waiting room, talking about it's amazing as I do these webinars and things that are relevant today on June 16, 2020, 2 weeks from now may not even be relevant anymore. I'm constantly updating my slide decks because this is such a dynamic situation. The point is you get this concept of normalcy bias, or everything's okay, we're fine, everything's fine. On the other end of the spectrum, and you can see where this concept of gut instinct. We simply just go ahead and we maybe do some things that are just simply not based on facts, but it just doesn't feel right. The point is we have to think about how to avoid those poor decision making, and how do we do this right, and once again avoid the dangers. And it's once again the rigors of making the right decision. So what are some of the potential winners and losers? A lot of this goes without saying, but you can see this is that bears and bulls that exist in all markets, the winners and the losers. The ones in green on the left-hand side of your screen, the manufacturing, the distribution channels, data communication centers, intelligent transportation systems, the integrated delivery that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. On the other hand, and keeping in mind, I'm sitting in a hotel in Charleston, South Carolina right now. I may be one of the only people in this hotel in Charleston, South Carolina right now. You look at the right-hand side, and it goes without saying. The lodging, the commercial markets, the office spaces, amusement and recreation. I cannot think of a time, I'm only 48 years old, but can't think of a time that Disney has been shuttered for more than 3 months. In fact, I remember 9/11 and several hurricanes that they shut the park down for 1 or 2 days, and that was shocking. So to think about the impact that this is going to have. Now, some people will say, Greg, well, I don't see medical on any of this slide. Isn't COVID a disease? And, why isn't medical on here? Well, for many, medical operations in North America, this is less to do with, whether it's publicly funded medical. Simple fact is there are elective surgeries that I can tell you, at least in the United States, they're not taking place right now. So that funding to fund hospitals is not there. So finding this kind of fine balance between making sure that we have a successful balance. So if I am operating in a medical sector, is it going to be more the private medical clinic, or is it going to be the large, medical office buildings? The point is, where do we operate, and what does the forecast look like? And once again, that's the data that we want our leaders to focus upon. So when we think about some of the other ramifications, first, from an incremental economic standpoint, we've talked about throughout the world the decline of retail. Is this I hate to use the word nail in the coffin, the final nail in the coffin? People have been saying for so long that the death of the mall, and short of my wife who loves going there, is this the rise of, more opportunity? That's a possibility. But also understanding this concept of, this, whatever is happening with fuel prices throughout the country. Obviously, the good news is fuel prices are at all-time lows in most markets. The bad news is no one's really driving anywhere. So it's the good versus the bad. If we can only just stockpile a lot of this fuel in our backyard, everything would be great. Additionally, supply chain. We've seen some very big impacts to the supply chain, whether that's transportation, logistics, inspections, and timelines. So we're going to talk about this in just a moment, but understanding what this is going to look like as it affects our projects in the short term as well as the long term. Additionally, shifts in design. For instance, as I talked about my friends at Disney World a few moments ago, and I don't work with Disney, I just happen to go there every now and again. And, you think about the queuing system that they have, and the changes that's going to do to just something like Disney World. Flying here, the queuing that was for going through security. All of these things coupled with when we talk about office layouts, that's going to have a pretty big impact. What about K through 12 education, higher education? The point is these are 3 pretty big buckets that business leaders need to be thinking about and should be on their main dashboard when it comes to things they have to solve for. Now, when we think about productivity, for many of you, you probably are very trade dependent or labor dependent businesses, and people have constantly asked me, well, Greg, isn't this list of rules that are going to be taking place, whether that's cleaning our tools or social distancing, isn't that going to affect our productivity? The answer is yes and no. That's a typical consultant answer, I might add. The point is, when we think about this concept of, some of these factors, and I've kind of segmented them into the good and maybe the not so good, whether that's crew sizing. For so long, we probably assumed, well, we need a 5-person crew. Well, we may have to do it with a 4-person crew, and that may provide some economies of scale. We're not going to be necessarily able to crew stack, which for my trade contractor friends, they're pretty excited about. For how long have they had to work beside or on top of other trades? Well, we can't do that anymore. On the other hand, we may lose productivity because maybe that 5-person crew was the right number and it's going to take longer to do something. Additionally, yes, there is going to be a cost or a time impact associated with cleaning tools. And you can see right below it, I talk about cleaning materials. Pieces and parts show up on job sites, we're going to have to clean them as well. And then you can see the whole litany of things that, and I know I'm speaking to the right audience here when we start talking about technology. With the movement towards going paperless, we've seen gains in productivity there. We've kind of had to burn the boats at the shore and actually do things leveraging technology appropriately. Additionally, we're not necessarily going to meetings upon meetings. However, we are going to meetings. We're using our time a little bit more efficiently and probably doing things like we're doing right now. Now, some people are great at multitasking and will have good dashboard time and do hands-free calling on the road. On the other hand, how often have you gone to a meeting, maybe in downtown Toronto or in Manitoba, and unfortunately, in Winnipeg, and you have to, simply go ahead and, go there for 15 minutes and then drive back to your office. The point is, we're finding ways to do this, as well as the other part of making sure we're using new tools, new equipment. While we've all become very familiar with things like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and GoToMeeting and even the program we're using here for Big Marker, the point is, we've got all these great tools. How do we keep using these things going forward? We use a term, we actually stole it from the War College. It's called VUCA. It basically defines the market conditions. And when we start talking about volatility, uncertainty, the complexity in the marketplace, as well as a certain level of ambiguity, I think I pretty much summed up where we stand right now. Our point is, when we have this VUCA world and we know there's so much unknown that's happening on a daily basis, are we thinking about the things on the right-hand side appropriately? And we'll talk about that more in a moment. First, when we kind of look at the top quintile of companies that grew more than 20% during the last recession, the point of this is to say there were very successful businesses during the previous recession. They prepared appropriately, they confronted that crisis, and more importantly, they capitalized. The idea of figuring out how to be prepared, we're probably past that at this point, in the sense that, if you're not prepared by now, I hate to be a negative Nelly, but you may be a little too late. On the other hand, that confrontation of the crisis, making sure that we've done the right level of depth and scenario planning. Because as I said earlier, we're going to have to also play offense. Are there opportunities to look at replacement revenue opportunities? Are there opportunities for developing other capabilities to win? And how do we adapt and act appropriately in spite of a very particularly strong headwind? So this is a very wordy slide. And once again, you'll also have the opportunity to download this deck. So I'm not going to read all of this to you. But looking at these 6 major buckets and saying, have you and your leadership team plan for these challenges? So when we think about market insights, what is our go-to market? as we go forward? How do we leverage the right level of pre-construction and estimating knowledge? Are we deploying business development assets, or better yet, are we deploying business development assets that were not traditional? Or for instance, are we taking project managers, superintendents, and helping get market knowledge from them? What about operations? Are we focused on looking about all of the productivity impacts, as I just alluded to a moment ago? Do we understand all the incremental unit cost pieces of our business? Organizational design. Well, there's definitely no perfect structure, but do we have people in the right places? And I'm not going to use the Jim Collins phrase, the right place on the bus, but looking at our org chart and saying, is that the most efficient way? Do people have roles and responsibilities that are right for us going forward? And are we also compensating people the right way? So we're going to now talk about the tactical side of the business. Excuse me. And the picture here, and you can tell from my video, I'm not running any marathons anytime in the near future. But as this collective starting gun goes off, it's going to look a lot like a marathon. When we see this starting gun go off and all of a sudden everyone's kind of traipsing forward, I'll be all the way at the back of that queue, by the way. What does this mean to the world marketplace? Now, if this was just one city, if this was the city of Vancouver that was impacted, and we have to figure out, we're starting all construction in Vancouver, there'd be an impact, no question. But we're talking about the entire world. So our job is to figure out, how do we deal with that from a tactical advantage? This list here gives you some of the short-term and long-term considerations that we have to kind of leverage. So how do we do this, from a productivity standpoint? How do we do it and not look like we're tripping over ourselves? How do we deal with the labor impacts as companies were furloughing people and cutting payrolls? Well, now we have to get back to work. Well, how do we do that? And I had one client in Pennsylvania say to me, he goes, Gregg, where am I going to get people? We're getting ready to get started, but we cut all our payroll. All of these items on this list are things that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But what does your list look like? If you were to say, what are those short-term and long-term considerations? What does that mean for our business? Now, this is an eye chart, and I deliberately put this to make sure you're still awake. That being said, I happen to, when I created this, the idea of having this restart or refocus strategy, and that arrow that's pointing there says, was our project work shut down, or was it were we deemed essential and we had to keep operating? And then you take that kind of fork in the road where it takes you, and it takes you all the way to the project conclusion. Once again, we're talking about project stability going forward. So for many of us, we're at and by the way, the next slides are all going to kind of go back to very specific elements of that process map. We think about, what is the future state of hygiene? And I can't believe I'm telling a group of adults we need to focus on hygiene, but that's the world we live in right now. But here's the job site signage and wash stations and social distancing for daily huddles or safety reviews, whatever we're looking at. This becomes the new normal. But once again, what is our response? Are we trying to get back to normal, or do we understand these new rules that are going to be taking place throughout North America? Additionally, when we start the next piece, which is the restart meeting, now I know all of you on this webinar did an amazing pre-construction planning for all of your projects, so that's great. However, I have many clients that don't do such a great job with pre-construction planning. The good news is this restart meeting is your second chance. But the second chance is going to be looking at things like labor projections, supply chain impacts, critical path impacts, owner needs, all of these things that are probably going on in the back of your mind. Well, now we know we're going to be getting restarted, or even if we weren't shut down, now's a great time to say, hey, let's circle the wagons and really investigate this project where we stand. This is another eye chart because I had to make sure my LASIK surgery was working. I don't want you to get hung up on not being able to read all those boxes, because I can also send this to you. It's actually in a white paper that is in the kind of the collection box So if you can't read this, no worries, but you'll see that in your post-webinar follow-up. The point is, this is what we have to have, a structured agenda that takes us through many of the items that I just brought up. Additionally, we start talking about the supply chain, and this is not simply just looking at those long lead items, but all items on our project. So if we're a general contractor building a commercial office building in Toronto, the question now becomes, where is every part and piece coming from? And you can see some of the items on this. Some of them are maybe international items. Some of them are, domestic. Some are, in the United States. The point is, what is the impact to the critical path? What is the cost to accelerate? And yes, I'm sure you'll get many questions where we'll say, hey, well, can you rush that or quick ship it to us? And the answer is, you and everybody else in the world. The point is, what is that cost to accelerate if possible? And if there is a delay, are you accounting for that in some sort of general conditions overrun? And I realize everyone calls general conditions different things, but when we start talking about, additional supervision, additional trailer rentals, those are the kind of things that are going to add up, and we need to track every single one of them. And you can see this is just a snapshot. So let's not let anything just simply, even if it's a small commodity item, we might go, oh, that's not an important thing. That's just hinges for doors and frames. Well, unfortunately, those small ticket items can end up impacting the greater project. One of my favorite pictures is a histogram, and I also can't tell you why. But if we're a labor-intensive contractor, part of our job is going to be to look at what does this mean for total body count. You can see the blue bars kind of showed the traditional or where we projected our labor count. The orange is the distorted or where we're now asking for more people. However, go back to the social distancing thing I said before, this may not be feasible. We're kind of scrunching the deadline, but we're also saying, well, wait a second, it says I need 40 people on the job site. How are we going to do that with all the rules? Also, one of the things we cannot forget is this concept of just simply dropping more bodies on the job site does not mean better productivity. We all know there's a law of diminishing returns. If you have a 4-person crew and you say, just put more bodies on it, that's not necessarily going to get you to the finish line any quicker. In fact, you may have a deleterious effect to productivity because we're just cramming bodies and obviously cost overruns. One of the things we need to be thinking about is, as we're going forward, what does that cost do to our overall cost curve? And this graph on the right-hand side of your picture kind of shows you not only the projected cost, the cumulative costs, to kind of show you that slight distortion. And this is simply just kind of moving everything to the right. I know all of you do cost curves, and this is the cost side. We're going to look at revenue in just a moment. But thinking about our critical path, overpopulation, workflow sequencing, revised inspection schedule, this is just moving everything to the right. But now it could be changed because we're going to have to look at the work breakdown structure completely different. Now is a great time to look at that CPM schedule, really dust it off and make sure that we've looked at delays from inspections or municipalities. If you have the ministry officials coming out to do inspections, they may be backlogged. Additional, consumable materials and PPE shortages are plaguing different parts of the world. Critical path materials, whether that's Canadian sourcing, you might have things that are coming from the United States. What about inspections and port delays? Additional, trade partners or maybe defaulted vendors. We don't know what this is going to do overall. Claims and change orders that were maybe pre-COVID, as well as claims and change orders that are happening now. They almost have to be looked separately to be just very careful. Utility startups, as we have our electrical departments and water and sewer, they may be backlogged. And owner FF&E, or if you're point of sale equipment, furniture, those things. These are all the things that have to be reflected on our CPM schedule appropriately. Additionally, this is the cash flow discussion we were talking about. So it's important for us to look at what is our each one of our projects and what does that 12-month cash flow look like? And then when we take those individual cash flow curves, overlaying them on the entire firm's line of business. And if we accounted for things like overtime, extra shipping costs, the supply chain impacts, what about those additional general conditions I talked about? Any bonding or insurance costs? What about those unapproved change orders that are maybe getting a little stale? Once again, now's the time to think about some of our customer impacts. What I mean by that is some of your customers have been adversely affected. What is their long-term liquidity? If you're maybe working in the public market, you have nothing to worry about, maybe. If you're working in the private market, now is a time to be concerned to make sure that they can make long-term payments. This is an example, very similar to what I showed you before, but this red triangle that's right in the middle of these pages, once again, this is the delta. The delta to make sure that we understand this one project is pushing all of our cash, and is it going to allow us to make our payroll? Is it going to allow us to make investments? How is our balance sheet stacking up appropriately? So once again, having all of our project teams do this internal cost and cash review appropriately. Lastly, we're going to talk about done. And I coined this phrase simply because one of my superintendents in my previous life, his name was Jay, and we would ask Jay, we would say, hey, Jay, are you done with the project? And he said, yeah, I'm done, except for these 22 deficiency list items. And my point is, no, are you done? Really done, meaning we can, kind of walk away. The point is, our job, especially now when we're thinking about focusing on done, we cannot procrastinate. Not that it was ever a good idea before COVID-19, but we cannot let deficiency lists or punch lists, if you prefer, linger. Our as-bills, our closeout documents. Additionally, think about cleaning and hygiene. I know for many of you, there was always maybe that line item that was called final cleaning on your budget. What is final cleaning going to look like in this new world order that we're talking about? Before it was usually just vacuuming and maybe putting some wax on some vinyl flooring. Now, are we going to have the folks with the full bio suits and hazmat equipment in there to do a final cleaning? Now, some of you may say, well, Greg, we didn't have that in the budget. Folks, don't run the entire marathon and at mile 26 find out you have 3 more miles to go. And that's about all I know about marathons, so we have to take my word for it. The point is, this is the opportunity for an exit strategy. So when we get to the end of the project, think of this as pre-construction planning for the last 10%. Also, don't let all this great knowledge that you've learned from this incredibly awful experience called the pandemic go to waste. As I said, I have many clients that are referring back to things they learned from the previous recessions and saying, hey, let's make sure we go to our checklist because, yes, it's not identical, and I hope we never have a COVID-19 or a COVID-20 or whatever number we might go up to. The point is, don't let this knowledge seep away. So I was reading this was a fiction book, not The Art of War, to be clear, but I was reading this book. It was fascinating because as I'm reading the book, the fellow's name is James Rollins, a mystery thriller, and this quote was on one of the chapters. In the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity. And those of you that have studied Sun Tzu and The Art of War probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but this is a great opportunity for us to be thinking about where is the upside of the upside down. You can tell I'm kind of a nerd, too, if I'm referencing Stranger Things in a program. The point is, the opportunity. Where are the opportunities in these new markets, the new offerings? Are we able to take advantage of new niches, whether that's some sort of horizontal or vertical expansion? Are we using technology? Once again, I know I'm talking to the right group, just based on what we're talking about throughout today. But we learned, and I use the word forced innovation, and I know it's a harsh word. What I mean, we probably were maybe dipping our toes in the water when it came to leveraging WebEx and GoToMeetings and all the virtual technology, and we had to really go in full whole hog. At this point, how do we not let that go to waste? How do we also drive increased productivity? lastly, there are going to be businesses that become acquisition targets. And I don't mean to be insensitive, but the simple fact, through some of this adversity, there are businesses that are going to say, we have the right offerings, but we just maybe don't have the cash flow. Once again, opportunistic businesses will say, hey, let's get together and find a way to grow our business more successfully. So some concluding remarks. We've covered a lot in roughly 41 minutes. The point that I want to make here is we have to understand, where do our projects stand, whether those are at-risk projects or at-risk clients. And this concept of restart is going to vary. So how well do we know how our clients are performing? What about the other end of that spectrum, which is our trade partners? So are they performing, whether that's folks in the design community, whether that is a trade contractor? The point is, those businesses that have high fixed costs may be challenged. It's not to say they can't overcome them, but how are they going to respond? Additionally, we're going to have to understand what productivity and efficiency means under new rules. Our job is also to think about getting smart on these different market sectors. As I said, looking across our portfolio of work and saying, yep, that's going to be okay because the market is going to need that type of service. On the other hand, this one is probably going to be a longer play. That's where we also need to get smart about this concept of demand elasticity. And I used the word before. I talked about things that maybe have inelastic demand, like medical services and infrastructure. On the other hand, things that have elastic demand, which is recreation, entertainment. Those are the things that if you charge more for a ticket to go to a movie, you go, I'll wait till it comes out on pay-per-view or something like that. I'm not going to spend the money. However, if we were to charge $1 million for water, and I know that's very unrealistic, we would probably say, hey, I'm going to need some water. I got to pay it, which that's that inelasticity that we're talking about. And I know many of you probably remember that from economics class, maybe in high school or college or university. And my point is getting smart and bringing some of these things back and saying, what does that look like for our business? Additionally, do we have the health or the life support monitoring for healthy projects, or healthy projects if you prefer? Because every project could quickly go from good to awful. You thought I was going to say good to great. I know you thought that. No, they could go from good to awful very quickly. Additionally, now we also need to be driving strong process accountability. So whatever your playbook is in your organization, we can't have cowboys and cowgirls being renegades, doing it their way. We have to get back to what our playbook is. So what does your operational model look like? Cash is king. I don't care where we are in an economic cycle. This is the subtle reminder how important cash in our business allows us to be able to weather these storms. You know, thinking about how we finish strong and execute flawlessly to the end. And lastly, folks, this is once again a very warm and fluffy piece, but be visible. I know for so many of the businesses that I work with, they're hunkering down because of the challenging markets and COVID-19, and we're just kind of head down and we're going to keep pushing forward. On the other hand, you as leaders, and I don't care whether you're a project manager, the executive vice president, president, or grand poobah, I want you to be making sure that you are out front, communicating, being visible, and okay, at least 6 feet or a couple meters there to make sure you're doing it right, but be visible as the leader in your business. I am at the conclusion of my program. I know I have time for questions, but if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me. I do work throughout North America, and I know these are challenging times. To me, this is an opportunity for all of us to find ways to hopefully leverage each other, and we're going to get through this, and hopefully at the end of it, get back to not normal, but better. With that, Mr. Tom, the floor is back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. All sorts of awesome insights in there, all sorts of takeaways, and I wrote down about 40 questions, which I can't ask because there's not enough time. But I am going to go back and rewatch this presentation. I mean, there's a lot of deep insight there, and I really appreciate your perspective. We are taking questions, so if the audience has questions, please type them into the Q&A there. But I guess with the time that we have, one of the things that's obviously kind of fundamental to our business is the cost of construction. And we had a quick chat earlier about commodity pricing and how this is potentially going to affect commodity pricing, but then the potential for productivity to be reduced because of the new requirements on the job site. So what do you think the short-term and long-term effects are going to be for cost per square foot generally for different project types?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. And obviously, I know I only have a couple minutes. I could probably spend a couple hours on it. There are probably two sides to that coin. And the one thing I know you and I spoke about before, I've heard something, and I want to say, at least from my perspective, I was a little distressed when I heard a client say this. And this was right around when everything was getting shut down. Some of my clients, the contractors, were having projects that were they had been awarded, but the client, the end user, said, you know what, we're going to pull it off the table and we're going to have you rebid it and so we can get a COVID discount. Now, there are many trade contractors who are like, there is no COVID discount. I get that, people think that, hey, as we go into a recession or a worldwide depression, if that was the case, there's this belief that, wow, we'll get people when they're really hungry and desperate. On the other hand, one of the things we can't forget is there are businesses that, because they're heavy fixed costs, like I talked about earlier, that are going to go out of business, which will then shrink the pool of, let's say, maybe a mechanical supply business. So they're going to shrink. Their prices are going to go up. Not to mention the fact that, what is this going to do to labor productivity? Are all these rules changes going to make us more unproductive, or is it going to increase costs? Possibly. So maybe in the short term, there's this belief that, well, we'll get some savings, but I think as people are navigating through this, to me, for all of the businesses, you really got to understand what are the costs and what are you going to be, tracking going forward. Do you really understand productivity? Are we having our estimators and pre-construction personnel dig deep enough to know what the true cost of something is? So a long-winded answer, and I didn't actually answer your question, Tom, other than to say that I think it's a complicated one there's probably a lot to be played out over the next 3 or 4 months.
So you mentioned liquidity, and obviously that's top of mind for anyone who's running a business. You got to make sure that you've got cash on hand, and you're right to point out that businesses that have large fixed costs are more susceptible to these types of bumps in our economic world here. But it was interesting what you said about kind of turning things upside down. And I work for a general contractor, and you think about the clients. We work for the clients. Everything we do is client oriented, and you want to bid on all the work that the client offers you. And it sounds like you have to be a little bit more cautious now and actually start to evaluate your client with the same kind of method that you might evaluate your suppliers, because your client may have liquidity issues. Especially clients that have a huge portfolio of, say, retail or commercial real estate, these types of things that you've mentioned that are susceptible. So do you think is that going to go away over time, or do you think that's just going to become more and more commonplace where, contractors have to think about risk in multiple directions now?
Actually, to me, and it kind of goes back to what I said before when I said cash is king. It shouldn't take the pandemic for us to go, oh yeah, we should have a strong balance sheet. The same thing here. I think a lot of my clients used to do customer evaluations and kind of, hey, are you a good potential customer? Do you mesh well with us because you have liquidity, you treat us fairly, we have similar value streams. Just like you would look to a supply chain, look upstream. But I think as the market was strong, there are probably some behaviors we got away from and go, hey, look, they're good for it. And when they have to pay their bill, it'll be fine. But now that's what I mean. You may have had some good projects, and it sounds like one of those awful specials you see on some channels where it says, when good projects go bad. Well, we could have a good project, but maybe they miss a progress payment, or they're delayed 15 to 20 days. I think those are the warning signs, but then feeding back and saying, hey, let's really vet this client to say, are they a good fit for us? That should stay long after we get through COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Well, very excellent insights. I wish we could talk for longer, but I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate joining us, and I'm sure that our audience really appreciated this as well. So I'm just going to wrap up so we have enough time to get to the next session, but I want to thank our sponsors once again, and we'll see you at the next session in about 9 minutes. So take care. We'll talk again.
Thank you, Tom. All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.